Hello and welcome to the Cavern of Terror.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Cavern of Terror, and welcome to my live-action Resident Evil film ranking. If you're new to the Cavern of Terror and this is your first video from me, welcome. Seriously though, if this is your first video from the Cavern of Terror and you don't know, I reviewed the original 6 live-action Resident Evil films. I have a playlist called Resident Evil Retrospective. You can head over there, watch all those reviews, and then come back to this video and see where I rank the original movies. If you like those videos, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Hang around for a little bit. Okay guys, with all that said, are you guys ready for a Resident Evil ranking? Boom! Here it is. This is from my Cavern of Terror LetterBoxd account. I have my ranking of the Resident Evil films. I know what you're saying, guys. Zach, why are all these movies in their order of release? Well, that's what I think the series stands as. I think the best movie is the first Resident Evil, and I think the worst movie is the last Resident Evil. We are going to get into why I think all these movies deserve to be in the position that they are in. Okay guys, so I normally would start with the best movie in the series and then move on to the last one. But I don't think I can do this with the Resident Evil series because, to be honest with you, if I go through these, starting with the best and ending with the worst, I'm going to be really pissed off by the end. If you've seen my review of Resident Evil, the final chapter, you'll know why. Starting with number 6, we have Resident Evil, the final chapter. I feel like I lost money going to go see this movie in 2016. Yes, it is that old. I thought it was newer than that. I actually thought it came out in 2017, but that is not true. It came out in 2016. I think that this movie is just terrible. This is a frustrating movie for me because of the editing. The editing is really, really bad. Like, when I went to go see this in theaters, I couldn't focus on pretty much anything. Story, action, anything because of the phonetic editing. It was so bad to watch in theaters, it kind of hurt my eyes. And there were people behind me that were actually enjoying it. I did say that in my Resident Evil Final Chapter review. I don't know how they enjoyed it, but they did. The characters in this movie are also terrible. They're pretty bad. The only things that I really kind of enjoyed was Ian Glenn from Game of Thrones, who plays, Jorah Mormont. He was a pretty good villain. He has been a pretty good villain since the third Resident Evil movie. I know he's not in the two prior to this, but he's in the third Resident Evil movie, and I thought it was a nice decision, or a good decision, to bring him back to be the villain in this one, which would be the strongest villain the series has. And we will get into why the other villains are pretty fucking terrible when we get into the other movies. But I thought he was a good thing. I thought that Ruby Rose was good because she had the most character development out of pretty much anyone other than Alice. But they go and kill her character off like halfway through the film. And this is going to be spoilers because most of you guys have seen these movies. Yeah, the characters suck. The storyline is convoluted as all hell in Resident Evil the Final Chapter. It retcons things that happened in the other movies. You are confused by the story because they changed a lot of things. They changed a lot of things from the first Resident Evil and the second Resident Evil that made the story make sense in the third one. So it makes the story make absolutely no sense. There's barely any zombies in Resident Evil. Actually, I think there's barely any zombies in the last 3 of these movies. I haven't seen these for a while, but I feel like the zombies kind of take the back seat, and that's not a good thing with the Resident Evil series. A series based on the undead. So, yeah. I think we're done talking about Resident Evil Final Chapter. It's easily the worst in this series. You can't tell what the hell's going on. The story makes no sense. It makes you doubt the previous sequels. It's fucking horrible, and I hate this movie. Coming in at number 5 is Resident Evil Retribution. This movie is a fucking music video. It's even more of a music video than the fourth movie. I'm sorry I'm laughing, guys, but these movies get really laughable after the third one. And not only is this movie basically a music video, it rips off other movies that are better than this one, especially in the opening scenario. Oh, by the way, this is basically a Resident Evil video game, just not as good as the Resident Evil video games. It rips off other movies that are better, specifically Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead remake. If you watch the beginning of Resident Evil Retribution and then watch the beginning of Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, tell me you can't draw comparisons there. Let me get into the characters that this movie butchers. Leon S. Kennedy is in this film, and I have to apologize to Johann Erb. He was not good in this movie, but he was pretty good on Arrow as the vigilante. I apologize, sir, you are capable of more, so that just tells me how bad this movie was. They took Leon S. Kennedy, one of the best characters from the game, one of the most well-loved characters from the game, and turned him into a generic action hero that's not even the main character of this movie. Ada Wong is also in this. Her character comes in about halfway through the film, and her motivations are really sketchy. She's also wearing the dress from Resident Evil 2 for absolutely no reason. The end of the world has happened. Dresses like that make absolutely no sense. If you're going to bring the character in, you gotta give her more of a motivation and give her something realistic to wear. I know that saying realistic in these last few movies is a bit of a stretch because these are over the top as all hell. But come on, the red dress, I know it's a nod to the fans, but it does not make any sense, and her character is not very good. The characters in this series haven't been good since probably the fourth movie, and that's a little bit of a stretch because, yeah, we'll get into that when we get to the fourth movie. But Ada Wong, pretty bad. Johann Erb as Leon S. Kennedy was also not what I was looking for. Barry Burton was done pretty well because you had a good character actor in Chris Durand to play that character. Is he the Barry Burton from the Resident Evil games? No. But Chris Durand is a good actor and he gave a good performance considering what he was given. And I liked this version of Barry. He was badass and he is a fan favorite character. And it was nice to see him in a Resident Evil film. Jill Valentine's character was pretty much butchered from the character that we got in Resident Evil Apocalypse, and they were just trying to appease the fans of Resident Evil 5 that her character came back in. So why make her bad guy? Why not make her good in this? Because her as a bad guy is just not good for me. She's not fleshed out. She's just basically the female Terminator from Terminator 3. Also, the disappearance of Claire and Chris from Resident Evil Afterlife, they make no explanation as to why they're gone, what happened to Chris, and they don't explain in Final Chapter what happened to Claire, because she comes back in Final Chapter, and there's no explanation as to why she's there. I don't know. I don't know what happened. Chris is just gone. He's not here. There are a lot of story problems in the last two movies. Paul W.S. Anderson should not be writing his films. Directing them on a lower budget should be the only thing this guy's doing. The action and editing is better in Resident Evil Retribution. That's why this movie is higher than Final Chapter. And honestly, it would be lower if I did not hate the editing of Resident Evil Final Chapter. The characters, the story in Resident Evil Retribution, it's fucking horrible. It's ripping off movies that are better than this movie, and I don't care about any of the characters. So that's why Resident Evil Retribution is number 5. Moving on to Resident Evil Afterlife. This movie isn't bad, but this movie isn't great either. It kind of sits in the middle here for me, being in the number 4 spot. I thought that Milla Jovovich was probably at her best in this movie. I think that this is the most well-shot film in the whole series. This movie looks gorgeous, and the characters are not terrible in Resident Evil Afterlife. Like I said, Milla Jovovich does a good job. Her character does have a little bit more layers than she has in the first 3 movies. I thought that all of the side characters were pretty interesting and more well developed than the ones that we got in the movies after this. Some of my problems lie with Wentworth Miller and his casting of Chris Redfield. I didn't really understand why they went with him. I like him, but he just didn't fit Chris Redfield for me. And the story with Chris Redfield and Claire Redfield just kind of gets abandoned for Alice's story. They start it, but they don't finish it. And then what they do in Resident Evil Retribution, completely getting rid of Chris Redfield's character, makes me not like this story at all in Resident Evil Afterlife, because there's no ending to it. This one also has probably the laziest treatment of the zombies. I know that zombies are pretty much barely in Resident Evil Afterlife, and if they are shown, they're pretty much CGI hordes that don't interact with any of the characters. So when you have a Resident Evil movie and barely have any zombies in it, and barely have any, people on zombie action, I kind of check out of the story. Speaking of the story, it's very similar to the second Resident Evil. You have a start point, you have an end point. It's very simple to get there. It is not convoluted. So I did like that part. But like I said, this movie's kind of bland for me. I know it does look really good, but not a whole lot happens in this. This movie also marks the beginning of the what the fuck moments in the Resident Evil series. Like, what are you doing here with the story? Because there are parts in Resident Evil Afterlife that are like, what happened in between there? I don't know where that came from. Especially with the big monster with the axe. That is a really cool scene. It's a very well shot scene. But it makes absolutely no sense. Where did this thing come from? Like I said in my review, why couldn't we get a scene of Wesker setting this thing loose? It's just a nod to Resident Evil 5, and that's it. Okay, guys, we have arrived. We are at the moderately good, if not great, Resident Evil movies. Let's get into the ones that I watched the most. Coming in at number 3, we have Resident Evil Extinction. I'm not gonna lie, it took me a long time to like this movie. But it is good. It's a nice, continuation of Resident Evil Apocalypse. It changes the tone. It's not as funny as the movie before. It gets a little bit more serious going back to the first Resident Evil. You get a badass Alice in this. Carlos is also very good in this. The action is great. This is directed by Russell Mulcahy, who directed the first Highlander film, which I love. He does very well with the action. There are great set pieces in Resident Evil Extinction. I love the look of this movie. I like the apocalyptic feel. This is kind of playing back to, the old Mad Max movies from George Miller. And I think it is a homage, not a rip-off, unlike Resident Evil Retribution, that is straight up ripping off other movies. I think that the characters are at their most layered in Resident Evil Extinction. I think that Ali Larter did a really good job playing Claire Redfield, the leader of another group. And she meshed very well with Milla Jovovich's Alice character. Thought that Carlos was great. I thought that LJ was very good. I was not a fan of killing that character off, because I feel like there needs to be a little bit of humor in these Resident Evil movies, and he was very good in Resident Evil Apocalypse. But I liked that this was a straightforward story, and we had a good villain. This movie had a great villain. I like that he basically turned into the tyrant from Resident Evil, the first Resident Evil game. I thought that was a nice tip of the hat to the first Resident Evil game, and I thought he was a good villain. One of the things, and this is a major thing that puts this movie below the second one, because I don't think it's better than the first. I think this could have been in the second slot if they actually cared about Albert Wesker. This is a disgrace, guys. Wesker is one of the best villains in the entire Resident Evil series, and he's just a generic character, a generic corporate figurehead, and it is horrible. It's a slap in the face to every Resident Evil game fan. That's why this movie comes in at number 3. Now we are here. We are at number 2, and we are at number 1. I really like Resident Evil Apocalypse. I think it is the truest to the game series, especially Resident Evil 3. We got our first introduction to Resident Evil game characters with Jill Valentine, played by Sienna Guillory, and Carlos Oliveira, played by Oded Fehr. And I thought that they were both very good at playing these characters. They interacted pretty well with each other, not as much as I would like, but they did have a kind of relationship, and I thought it was cool. A tip of the hat to the Resident Evil game series, especially Resident Evil 3. I thought that Alice was a good character in this. Was she a little bit too OP? Maybe. I thought that it was cool, her discovering more of what she can do in Resident Evil Apocalypse. I thought the action in Resident Evil Apocalypse was done very well. Surprise, surprise. Aside from one cemetery scene that was just, I don't know what the hell was going on there. The editing was really bad. But we did get a really good callback to the game series here. We got a really cool, fan service Resident Evil film. I feel like we should have had more story taken from the Resident Evil games. I think that's what hurts this series. But we actually got a nice callback to the game series for the fans of the games, and I thought the introduction of the stars was a nice move to take. I thought that adding Nemesis as the primary antagonist was really cool, and he looked awesome. He looked really well being a practical effect, practical makeup. Looked really good for Nemesis. It does kind of look a little cosplayish at some points, but I think that's because they went full practical here. If there is CGI in this film, it's near the end, and there's not a lot here that I saw. The main two things that make me like this movie better than Resident Evil Extinction is the fact that there is that fan service there, and the characters here are very well done. I thought that we had enough development across the board for pretty much everyone. They were really serious. They were serious about the characters in this, so this was casted very well. We got Oded Fehr, we got Mike Epps as LJ, we had Jared Harris as Dr. Ashford, we had Ian Glenn as Dr. Isaacs near the end, and we had Zach Ward as Nikolai Janofiev. I thought that they did really well with the casting here because they knew that they were going to have a more character-driven movie in Resident Evil Apocalypse. Yes, there is a lot of action, but you had to care about the characters because of the ticking clock. Drum roll, please, guys, even though you already know it. Resident Evil comes in at number 1. And if you know me, you know that I did not like this movie for a very long time. But I think this is the most well-shot, most well-acted, most well-paced movie, best action in the whole Resident Evil series. Like I said, I did not like this movie when I first saw it in theaters. Yes, my mom actually took me to go see Resident Evil in theaters when it came out in 2002. I was 12 when this movie came out. She knew I was a big Resident Evil fan. She knew I wanted to go see it. And I remember the trailers for it with the umbrella infomercials. I thought that was really, really cool. The umbrella commercials. I was like, this is going to be awesome. I have to go see this movie. And I didn't like it. When I watched this movie later, I'm talking like 10 years later, I loved it. I thought it was great. I thought the characters were really well done. I thought the action was good. I thought that the practicals were good because this is mostly practicals. There is some CGI near the end, which is dated because this is an older movie. But I really enjoyed this low-budget action film, and that's what it was. It was an independent British film, and I really enjoyed it as a older, more experienced film fan when I saw it about 10 years after I watched it. It's a simple story from point A to point B like we have in most of the Resident Evil films, but we do have good characters here. We do have a nice mystery unfold, which is a big element of the first Resident Evil game. We find out more about this mysterious character named Alice. We find out more about this huge conglomerate called Umbrella and what misleading things that they might be getting into. Bioweapons. I thought the scene where they find all the monsters and stuff inside the one warehouse is awesome. I thought that was really interesting. The zombies look great. The music by Marco Beltrami and Marilyn Manson. I thought it was perfect for this film. It makes the atmosphere for the most part because this isn't your most flashy movie. This is a bare bones little action film, and I thought that it was fun. This movie doesn't get convoluted. It doesn't make you question the other sequels. You don't get pissed off about a bad main villain because this movie doesn't need a main villain. You can't get pissed off about the way they treat game characters because they're not in this movie. I know they did find an interesting way to get them in the sequel, but they fucked that all the way up in the sequels after Apocalypse. And that doesn't happen in the first Resident Evil. It's an interesting story from point A to point B. It doesn't piss me off, and it's fun and well shot, and I have nothing to really complain about in the first Resident Evil movie. That's why I like it more than any of the other ones. Alright guys, that is it. That is my ranking of the live action Resident Evil films. What would you rank this series? Let me know down in the comments down below. As I was doing this video, I couldn't help but think about the Underworld series as well, and the fact that I didn't rank those movies. So coming up very soon, I'm going to do a ranking of the Underworld series as well. And yes, I will be finally reviewing Final Destination 4, or The Final Destination, or whatever the hell it's called. I just want to let you know, if you want to get yourself a badass Cavern of Terror t-shirt, see that right there? See that? A badass Cavern of Terror t-shirt? Go over to my Spreadshirt store, Cavern of Terror, and get yourself a Cavern of Terror shirt designed by myself and the man, Woody fucking Bowen. I have my personal shirt on order right now, and I cannot wait to show you guys in a future video. So like I said, if you want to get yourself a Cavern of Terror t-shirt, hit up the merch store in that motherfucking description box. If you're new to the Cavern of Terror and you like my content, make sure you hit that subscribe button right over there. Don't worry, it won't bite you. This next step is extremely vital. Make sure you hit that notification bell, because if you don't get to see any of my future content because you won't be notified. As always, guys, I would appreciate it if you followed me on social media. You can find all those links in that description box down below as well. But most importantly, guys, I'm Zach. This has been the Cavern of Terror. Stay metal, my friends.